one of Tony Blair's first acts when he came in within the first couple of weeks was to actually get rid of grant maintained schools. And then we got the academies coming in. The academies originally were actually failing schools. They were replaced usually by nice, shiny, brand new schools with a sponsor coming in, giving sort of £1-2 million, be that up in this area, Northumbria Water, Leighton Group in Sunderland, or the diocese. So there's usually some sort of fairly substantial endowment fund sitting behind those trusts that were set up then. So they operated for about 8 years, so from 2002, and by the way, you'll notice that's the 20-year anniversary is coming up this year on those openings. So 2010 came along, and Michael Gove, rather sort of cleverly in my opinion, kept the name Academies, when he actually sort of said to outstanding schools, you can convert. And obviously there was some additional monies and everything else available at that point in time. And then obviously we had the move from outstanding to good schools that could actually convert. The hokey-cokey years down there refers to the years when literally the white paper was sort of mentioned, everybody had to sort of convert to an academy, then it was withdrawn, and nobody knew really what was happening. And I know there was a lot of sort of interest at the time because I spoke to about 400 people at Ramside Hall back then around what academization would actually mean in terms of finance for those organisations. So a number of years where nothing's really sort of happened, and then obviously we've got the white paper coming in just in March this year, and then the talk of sort of 2030. So in March we obviously got the white paper, which is what I'm going to really talk around. The SEND stuff, I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not going to sort of touch that much time on that. But what's really happened and what people probably need to pay more attention to is the white paper's come out, but then we've had a significant number of other documentation come out in May. And the one that sort of really people probably need to have a look at is that implementing school systems reform in 22-23, because that does give you sort of a fairly good heads up on actually what's going to be happening. It's aimed at the academic year 22-23, so it's looking at September of this year, but it does include the education investment areas, and it talks about those in a lot of detail, and I'll mention that in a bit more in a minute. And it also talks about the local authority establishing multi-academy trusts and what it actually means. So again, it's a bit of a heads up for those that potentially have got those happening within their locality. So I'm not going to go through and read what's on the next few slides, because I think you can all read for yourself rather than me just stand here sort of saying exactly what it says on there. And hopefully you can actually read what the information, the slides that are actually in your pack. The idea afterwards is we will send out the slides to you all as well, so you've actually got them in colour and can actually circulate those to the organisations that you're members of. What I think you can say though is there was already a challenge within the education sector. There was a sort of difference in education between different areas and between what different trusts were able to provide. And I think realistically the last 2 years with sort of COVID has probably sort of exacerbated that sort of situation. So there was a need for a sort of a significant change. So there's a lot of sort of things coming through here. I mean, obviously it's talking around the sort of, it's talking really, and what we're trying to do here is, what Kevin's trying to do is break it down by sectors. But I think you'll be sort of, I mean, 500,000 sort of new teachers in training and development by 2024, I think is ambitious, to put it mildly. So I think what they have set out here is some very ambitious targets. Whether achievable or not is another thing. But it's also sort of picking up on things like the £30,000 salary, which has already been mentioned to us. And I think another thing which came really out of sort of COVID is really about legislation on recording attendance, re-engaging students who are severely absent. Going around speaking to a lot of trusts at the moment, that is a major problem at the moment, is actually trying to get those sort of pupils back actually into school. They are so used to being out of school that trying to get them back into that environment is not been easy. So there's additional sort of legislation coming in around that. As I say, I'm not going to go through and read these to you because I think you can all read them by yourselves. Big thing which everybody's picked up on, and the press has definitely picked up on, is the 2030 and every sort of single sort of school being part of a multi-academy trust by 2030. What I would say and what I didn't say on the original slide where I was looking at the history was, obviously today's 2022, we're looking at every sort of potential school becoming an academy by 2030. There is obviously going to be some elections in between then and now. So we're going to have another general election in 2.5 years' time at a push. What we're hearing from the Labour government is not any sort of radical change on what's being discussed here. So although some people are sort of saying, well, actually there'll be a change of government and therefore actually do we need to sort of be mindful of this? What we're hearing very much is that Labour are to a large degree on side with this. There may be some sort of tinkering at the edges, but actually the direction of travel is sort of really sort of set. It's just a question of, as I say, whether there's other sort of fringe benefits along the way. So aim is, as it says on there, is that all schools will be part of a trust. But as people will notice on there, there is a question mark against things like what is a strong mat? And that is something at the moment that we do not know. Because the idea here is that all academies, or all schools I should say, will be part of a strong mat. What is a strong mat? We don't have that sort of definition yet. But so it'd be interesting to sort of see how that one plays out over time. And then the implementation plan, and I'll refer to this, apologies for picking up papers and sort of reading bits from this. It talks in here about who the implementation framework is aimed at. It talks about MATs, it talks about maintained schools, it talks about SATs, it talks about local authorities, it talks about diocesan boards. It would have been easier if it had just said everybody, to be perfectly honest, that's involved in the education sector. And that's really sort of what we've got. Within this paper, it does set out what the first phases are and what the priorities are for the forthcoming years. In 2022-23, what we're looking at is really these what are known as educational investment areas, of which there are sort of 55 across the country, and I'll come back to those in a minute. And then it also talks about these test and learn projects, which are really sort of around the sort of the local authorities establishing sort of multi-academy trusts where they are needed, is the phrase within the document that's been provided, and also to respond to local demand, because in certain instances you'll appreciate, especially with Northumberland and sort of North Yorkshire, there are a lot of small schools in some of those localities, and actually trying to get a trust which is going to take on a school which has got 24 pupils or something of that size, financially it doesn't make that much sense. So trying to set up something which will actually work for those is going to be sort of key. And then coming back to that sort of the EIAs, these educational investment areas, as I say, there's 55 of them. Of those, we've got Darlington, Hartlepool, Middlesbrough, Sunderland, North Yorkshire, and parts of County Durham are actually in that 55. They've then sort of taken that down to a subgroup of a further 24 within that, which includes sort of Hartlepool, Middlesbrough and the North Yorkshire coast, which are going to get a particular sort of influence on, and they're going to get prioritised within this. And as it says on there, I mean, if your school is in an EIA area, or you're looking to help a school in an EIA area, then there is significant additional monies there. When the £86 million it's talking about for the TCAF is monies over the next 3 years, so it's not per year, but that's over the next 3 years. But that's roughly double what's been available previously, so that's a fairly significant increase. And then the £40 million of additional funding is for those 24 areas that have been prioritised. So, as I say, Hartlepool, Middlesbrough, the coast of Yorkshire there. And the difference in funding between those in an EIA area and outside also looks to be fairly significant, because what they're talking about is a grant of up to sort of £310,000 for those trusts which are helping at least one sort of school that requires improvement or is inadequate, which is fairly significant when you consider that usually to sort of £100,000 which is on offer outside of that area. So there is a definite focus on these EIA areas. I'll get the tongue around that in a minute. There's a map and listing at the back of the document, so it's helpful. Unfortunately, though, the EIA areas do come with a sort of a slight health warning in some respects. So from September 22, maintained schools and academies currently judged as requiring improvement by Ofsted that were also judged below good in their previous inspection may also be in scope. So basically what that is in scope to either join an academy trust or, if you're a SAT, be pushed into a sort of multi-academy trust. Now they're all going to be looked at on merit, so it's not a definite sort of movement across, but that's a sort of tightening up of where we were on those rules and regulations a little while ago. And if you are a MAT, and obviously everybody in this school, in this room, has a sort of relationship with a trust at the moment, where an eligible academy is already a MAT and they've received consecutive judgments below good, we'd assess whether the current trust is able to deliver necessary improvements, and if not, we would look to arrange a transfer to a stronger trust. So it is very much looking at, if you've got Ofsted coming in and they are giving some inadequate or requiring improvements to some of the schools within your trust, then you have to be thinking about what can we do to improve them to actually stop them actually potentially moving into another trust around the area. And it's also going to be interesting from a financial aspect, because if that trust has got £250,000 worth of cumulative reserves, does that £250,000 of cumulative reserves go with that school across the new trust? Probably. If you've gone down the GAG pooling route, and actually the only monies you're carrying forward are a bit of pupil premium and a bit of sort of PE monies, well, does that mean that there is actually only that pupil premium and sort of PE monies actually going across potentially with that school to another trust? So it's going to be interesting to sort of look at the dynamics of how that works from a financial implication, and it might actually get one or two more schools actually thinking, well, actually, I'd like to go down the GAG pooling route because actually that leaves us less vulnerable if any of the schools actually do transfer out. Could be wrong, but that's just a possible sort of thought on there. The paper also goes on to sort of look at sort of the area-based commissions, and it's talking here about very much now sort of moving back to sort of regional models. So whereas a while ago we had some of the trusts picking up schools all over the country almost, it's now sort of looking at trying to work out what actually works in that area. And they're trying to bring together the various organisations to actually work on that area, rather than at the moment you're having disparate organisations within the ESFA, have separate departments, then got RSC and what have you, all having sort of separate input, trying to get them all working across that region together. So actually try and get the best approach for that sort of locality. And it does also talk in here about sort of the focus on strategic, not incremental growth of strong trusts, which is sort of giving a hint realistically that actually we're not looking here at a multi-academy trust taking on one school per year, but actually we want you to try and take on a number of schools per year, which may well be a challenge, I think, if you've got schools which are inadequate or RI. Taking those on, I think, realistically, the number you actually want to take on a yearly basis is relatively low. That's my personal view, and from what I've seen of trusts that have taken on schools which do require that in the past, unless you've got a lot of sort of spare capacity internally, which a lot of trusts haven't got usually, there are some issues there. And for those that are interested in the local authority established MATs, it does go into a bit more detail about those MATs and actually what they should be looking like. And it sort of says these local authorities, they're not limiting them to the education improvement areas. We need to be able to establish new MATs where too few strong trusts exist. Well, what is too few and what is a strong trust, as I was saying before? So we're still not sort of clear on the sort of definitions there. Interestingly enough, what they've actually said within the document is local authority could have, say, 4 out of 5 members. So they're not. So at least a trust has got to have at least one sort of non-local authority member. So on the membership side, they're sort of allowing it to be sort of local authority led. But then on the trust level, what they're saying is it's got to be less than 20% at a trustee/director level. So I'm not sure why they've sort of taken that route on that basis, but I'm working with a another group work on a countrywide look at what should members be doing. And at the moment, we're sort of pulling that together, because at one extreme, we've got members who literally turn up for one meeting of an AGM, which takes 30 seconds, and then we have a coffee and everybody disappears. To at the other extreme, we have sort of those individuals actually wanting to see the monthly management accounts, wanting to see the copies of every single minutes that are actually going on at the school almost. So we do have a wide sort of range of where members sit at the moment, and it'll be interesting to try and pull that one back to sort of have a sort of common theme that trusts actually know is actually a model they should be following across the country. The other thing down there, for the CEOs in the room, a new MAT CEO development programme. I think probably those that have actually become CEOs will actually appreciate the fact that you originally were a teacher and that's what you had. Now you've got, in some cases, fairly substantial budgets with a significant number of staff and a lot of responsibilities placed on you. And I don't think there's been that much additional training or for those individuals that have taken on those roles over the last few years. So it'll be interesting to see what those programmes look like and whether those can be developed going forward. The other thing I should have picked up on earlier, when it's talking about sort of multi-academy trusts being by 2030, it's talking about sort of 7,500 pupils or 10 schools. That's going to be a bit of an issue where you've got primary schools, because obviously you've got some primary schools, 200-300 pupils, and you're down to like more than 10 to actually get to 7,500 pupils. So it's going to be interesting to sort of see how that one actually works in reality. And I think the rest of that on that slide there, I've picked up, the other one there, Secretary of State having powers to actually bring local authority schools into the academy sector. So if they deem it appropriate, then obviously they can now sort of pull those across if everything goes ahead. So, talk about 9 regions, almost goes back to the Regional Development Agency days many years ago, having 9 regions across the country. And as I say, it's trying to focus on those regions and actually trying to bring all the agencies together to actually work on those regions. And then on here, again, it's sort of a list, so I'm not going to go through it sort of line by line. But what it's trying to do is actually set out who has what sort of responsibility for what. So sort of local authorities remaining at the heart, and obviously they're able to sort of coordinate matters. Department for Education being a sort of steward. You've then got sort of the inspectorate making sure that everything's sort of looked at externally from an Ofsted and etc. And what it's saying is Song Trust's solely accountable for school improvement and delivery of a brilliant education for children. And that really, if you can bring that down to actually the focus of actually what the trusts are, then that's, I think that would be brilliant. And then those are a few things which Kevin sort of pulled out as being sort of an idea of sort of the direction of travel, but as I was saying, not incremental. So they want really realistically a reasonable number of these trusts to expand at a reasonable rate. They want it to be sort of strong trusts. So I think the days of the standalone Academy Trust is really being sort of pushed out here. And what they've actually said in one or two of the other documents is the only standalone Academy Trust that will actually allow now is actually a free school. So that's the only one that actually allowed to actually occur. And then only if they're going to sort of grow substantially thereafter. I'm not entirely sure where trusts do not have capacity or space for further growth. Sort of that phrase of space seems a little bit odd to me, but I think that's why Kevin sort of picked it up and put the question marks in there. And then the SEND paper, I'll be perfectly honest, I'm going to leave you to sort of read those slides yourselves, because it's stepping into an area that I don't sort of really sort of have that much of a sort of an idea of from a day job. I've a better understanding from a trustee role, because this is something that comes up on a regular basis. But I do appreciate it is a big challenge for you at the moment, especially with sort of the outcome of sort of COVID coming through, and what we're actually seeing is actually the AP requests increasing, the amount of SEND sort of is actually increasing. And when we're sort of talking to clients, the sort of the cost pressures which are coming through on that are fairly significant. Because as one was putting me to the other day, I mean the AP provision was costing them about £20,000 per student. If you're only getting in £5,000 or £6,000, that puts a lot of pressure on your budgets